The crack of thunder rolled across the darkened Montana sky as Katherine Whitfield clutched the broken wagon wheel, her knuckles white with frustration. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new life in Silverton now seemed as distant as the fading daylight. Rain had begun to fall, first as scattered droplets that pattered against the canvas cover, then in earnest sheets that threatened to turn the riverbank into impassable mud. Her journey west from Boston had been fraught with challenges, but none so dire as this stranded beside the rushing waters of the Yellowstone River with night approaching and no shelter in sight. "Damn it all," Katherine muttered, pushing a strand of copper hair from her face. At 24, she had faced her share of hardships, but the death of her parents and the subsequent loss of their millinery shop had forced her hand. The letter from her aunt in Silverton offering her a place to stay and work had been a lifeline, one she had grasped with both hands. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the rain, and Katherine spun around, her hand instinctively reaching for the small revolver tucked into her skirt pocket. The lone rider approached slowly, his silhouette materializing through the downpour. Tall and broad-shouldered, he rode with the easy confidence of a man who knew the land. The brim of his hat was pulled low, sheltering his face from the rain. "Looks like you've got yourself in quite a predicament, madam," the stranger called out, his voice deep and clear despite the storm. He dismounted with fluid grace, leading his chestnut stallion closer. Katherine stood her ground, chin lifted. "The wheel split when I hit that rock. I've no way to fix it." The man approached, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that revealed a handsome face with a strong jaw and eyes the color of the stormy sky. "Quincy Blackett," he introduced himself, extending a gloved hand. "Most folks just call me Quinn." "Katherine Whitfield," she replied, accepting his handshake briefly. "I'm headed to Silverton." Quinn surveyed the damaged wagon and the nervous mare still hitched to it. "That wheel won't be fixed tonight. Storm's getting worse, too." He looked at her directly, his expression serious. "We'll make it home tonight, Miss Whitfield. My ranch is about 5 miles upriver." Katherine hesitated. The prospect of accepting help from a stranger, especially a male stranger, went against everything she had been taught. But the rapidly darkening sky and the deepening chill left her with few options. "I can't abandon my belongings," she said, gesturing to the wagon filled with everything she owned in the world. Quinn nodded, understanding the gravity of her situation. "We'll secure what we can, bring the essentials with us. I'll send my ranch hands back for the rest at first light." He hitched his horse to a nearby tree and began working to free Katherine's mare from the wagon. "We need to move quickly." Within minutes, Quinn had helped Katherine gather her most valuable possessions, a small trunk of clothing, a satchel of personal items, and a box containing her mother's silver hairbrush and hand mirror. He secured them expertly to his horse, then unhitched her mare completely. "You can ride your horse," he said, adjusting the saddle. "I'll walk alongside." "I couldn't possibly," Katherine began to protest. "It's not open for debate, Miss Whitfield. The ground's getting treacherous and Renegade here can handle my weight and your belongings better than your mare can." The rain had soaked through Katherine's traveling coat, and she shivered involuntarily. Quinn noticed immediately and removed his own duster, draping it around her shoulders despite her protests. "My shirt's waterproof," he explained, though they both knew it was a half-truth at best. "Now, let's get moving before this river decides to rise any further." The journey to Quinn's ranch was arduous. The rain continued relentlessly, and the darkening sky made the trail difficult to follow. Katherine, though an adequate rider, struggled to keep her mare calm amid the frequent lightning. Quinn walked steadily beside her, one hand occasionally reaching up to steady her when the horse shied. "Not much further now," he called up to her after what felt like hours. "Just beyond that ridge." Katherine could barely make out the silhouette of hills against the night sky, but she trusted his knowledge of the land. Sure enough, as they crested the small rise, the lights of her ranch house glowed warmly in the distance. "Blacket Ranch," Quinn announced with unmistakable pride. It's not much, but it's home. As they drew closer, Katherine could see that not much was a significant understatement. The main house was substantial, a two-story structure built of sturdy logs with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Several outbuildings, including a large barn, bunkhouse, and what appeared to be a workshop, completed the compound. A corral held several horses that whinnied in greeting as Quinn and Katherine approached. A tall, lanky man emerged from the barn, lantern in hand. "That you, Quinn?" "We was starting to worry." "It's me, Hank," Quinn called back. "We've got a guest." Miss Whitfield's wagon broke down by the river crossing. Hank hurried forward, taking the reins of Quinn's horse. "Madam," he nodded respectfully, "let's get you inside where it's dry." Quinn helped Katherine dismount, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a brief moment, their faces were close enough that she could see droplets of rain clinging to his eyelashes. She quickly stepped back, flustered by the unexpected intimacy of the moment. "Thank you," she murmured, clutching his duster around her shoulders. "Don't mention it," Quinn replied, his voice softer than before. "Hank, see to the horses. I'll show Miss Whitfield inside." The interior of the ranch house was as impressive as its exterior. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, its crackling flames casting a warm glow over polished wooden floors and comfortable, if simple, furniture. The walls were adorned with a few paintings, landscapes of the Montana Territory, and a rifle hung above the mantel. "Mrs. Abernathy." Quinn called out, "We have a guest in need of dry clothes and a hot meal." A plump, gray-haired woman bustled in from what Katherine assumed was the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. Her eyes widened at the sight of the bedraggled pair. "Land's sakes, Mr. Blacket." "You're both soaked to the bone," she hurried forward, clucking disapprovingly. "Come, miss, let's get you out of those wet things before you catch your death." "Mrs. Abernathy is my housekeeper," Quinn explained as the older woman took Katherine by the arm. "She'll get you settled. I need to check on a few things in the barn, but I'll be back shortly." Before Katherine could thank him again, Mrs. Abernathy was leading her up the stairs to a guest bedroom. The room was simply but comfortably furnished with a four-poster bed, a dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. A copper bathtub had been placed before a small fireplace, and to Katherine's amazement, Mrs. Abernathy immediately began filling it with hot water from kettles that had apparently been heating in anticipation of Quinn's return. Mr. Blackett radioed ahead using that new telegraph line they ran to the Carson property, Mrs. Abernathy explained, noting Katherine's surprise. "Said you'd be needing a warm bath and some dry clothes." "He has a telegraph." Katherine couldn't hide her astonishment. Such technology seemed out of place in the wilderness. "Just installed last year. Mr. Blackett believes in progress," the housekeeper said proudly. "Now I'll find you something to wear. You look to be about the size of Mr. Blackett's sister, and she left some dresses here from her last visit." Left alone with the steaming bath, Katherine gratefully shed her sodden garments and sank into the warm water. The events of the day had left her exhausted, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Quinn Blackett was not what she had expected to find in the Montana Territory. He was educated, that much was clear from his speech, and his ranch spoke of prosperity beyond what most achieved in these parts. After her bath, Katherine dressed in the borrowed clothes, a simple but well-made blue dress that fit her surprisingly well, and made her way downstairs. She found Quinn seated at the dining table, now dressed in dry clothing himself. His damp hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and he had shaved, revealing a clean-cut jawline that softened his rugged appearance. He stood as she entered. "Feeling better, Miss Whitfield?" "Much thank you," she replied, suddenly self-conscious under his attentive gaze. "And please call me Katherine." "Katherine," he repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "Then you must call me Quinn, Mrs." Abernathy served a hearty meal of venison stew, freshly baked bread, and apple pie for dessert. As they ate, Katherine found conversation with Quinn surprisingly easy. He asked about her journey west, listening with genuine interest as she described her life in Boston and the circumstances that had led her to Montana. "My aunt, Eleanor Williams, runs the general store in Silverton," Katherine explained. "After my parents died, she wrote offering me a position and a place to stay." Quinn's expression registered recognition. "Eleanor Williams, I know her well, formidable woman, runs the best store in 3 counties. You know my aunt." Katherine felt a small measure of relief at this connection. "Silverton's not large and Blacket Ranch does most of its business there," Quinn explained. "Your aunt drives a hard bargain, but she's fair. She mentioned a niece might be joining her." As the evening progressed, Katherine learned that Quinn had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years earlier. At 30, he had expanded the operation significantly, breeding horses and cattle that were sought after throughout the territory. "He had been educated back east, a requirement of my mother's," he explained with a wry smile before returning to Montana to learn the family business from the ground up. "And what of your family?" Katherine asked. "You mentioned a sister." "Clara lives in San Francisco with her husband," Quinn replied. "My mother returned to Philadelphia after my father died. She never quite adapted to frontier life." There was something in his tone, a hint of old pain that made Katherine wonder about the story behind his words, but she didn't press. Outside, the storm continued to rage, making her all the more grateful for the shelter and kindness she had found. After dinner, they moved to the sitting area near the fire. Quinn poured them each a small glass of brandy for medicinal purposes, he said with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I can't thank you enough for your help today," Katherine said, sipping the amber liquid cautiously. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "Anyone would have done the same," Quinn replied, though they both knew that wasn't necessarily true. The frontier could be a dangerous place for a woman alone. "Perhaps," Katherine conceded, "but it was you who did, and I'm grateful." Their eyes met over the rims of their glasses, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of something kindred in their spirits. The crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind outside created a cocoon of intimacy around them. Quinn cleared his throat and broke the spell. "I've sent word to your aunt that you're safe. The telegraph line to Silverton is down because of the storm, but one of my men rode to the Carson place and sent a message from there. I've also arranged for your wagon to be brought here tomorrow, and my foreman will see about fixing that wheel." "You're very kind," Katherine murmured. "Not kind," Quinn corrected. "Just doing what needs doing." He stood, setting his empty glass aside. "You should get some rest." "It's been a long day," Katherine nodded, suddenly aware of her fatigue. "Good night, then, and thank you again." "Good night, Katherine," Quinn replied softly. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Katherine couldn't help but glance back. Quinn stood by the fire, his profile illuminated by the dancing flames, looking thoughtfully into the distance. Something about him called to her in a way no man ever had before. It was foolish, she knew, to feel such a connection after just one evening, but the seed had been planted nonetheless. Sleep came quickly that night, the sound of rain against the windows a soothing lullaby. Katherine dreamed of rushing rivers and strong hands pulling her to safety, of stormy eyes that seemed to see into her very soul. Morning brought clear skies and a changed landscape. The river had risen considerably, flooding the lower meadows of Blacket Ranch. From the window of her room, Katherine could see men on horseback moving cattle to higher ground. Among them, Quinn's figure was unmistakable as he directed the operation. Mrs. Abernathy provided a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and hot coffee. "Mr. Blackett asked me to tell you he'll be in shortly," the housekeeper said. "The rivers caused some trouble, but nothing we haven't seen before." True to his word, Quinn appeared just as Katherine was finishing her meal. His clothes were mud-splattered and he looked tired but satisfied. "Morning," he greeted her, pouring himself coffee. "Sleep well." "Better than I expected," Katherine admitted. "How bad is the flooding?" "We've lost some fencing, and the main road to Silverton will be impassable for a few days," Quinn replied, settling into a chair across from her. "I'm afraid you'll be our guest a bit longer than planned." Katherine felt a flutter of both anxiety and something else, something warmer at the prospect of staying at Blacket Ranch. "I don't want to impose, it's no imposition," Quinn assured her. "Your wagon's been brought up from the river. The wheel's damaged beyond repair, but my foreman thinks he can craft a replacement. It'll take a few days, though." Before Katherine could respond, Hank appeared at the door, hat in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but we've got trouble at the north pasture. That new fence line didn't hold." Quinn sighed and stood. "Duty calls. Make yourself at home, Katherine. Mrs. Abernathy can provide anything you need." Left to her own devices, Katherine spent the morning exploring the ranch house. The library particularly captured her attention, shelves lined with books on a variety of subjects, from animal husbandry to Shakespeare. A piano stood in one corner, its surface polished to a high shine. On impulse, Katherine sat and played a simple melody, her fingers remembering the lessons of her youth. "You play beautifully," Quinn's voice startled her. He stood in the doorway, having returned without her noticing, Katherine's hands stilled on the keys. "Not really. It's been years since I practiced regularly. Music is rare out here," Quinn said, entering the room. "My mother insisted on lessons for both Clara and me, but I'm afraid I never progressed beyond the most basic pieces." "I could teach you," Katherine offered impulsively, then immediately felt foolish. "I mean, if we're to be stranded together for days." Quinn's smile was warm. "I'd like that." He crossed to the bookshelves, selecting a volume. "Do you read Emerson?" "Some," Katherine admitted. "My father was fond of the Transcendentalists." This revelation led to a discussion of literature that carried them through lunch and into the afternoon. Katherine was surprised and delighted by Quinn's breadth of knowledge. He was as comfortable discussing the merits of Thoreau as he was explaining the breeding of quarter horses. The next few days fell into a comfortable rhythm. In the mornings, Quinn would attend to ranch business while Katherine helped Mrs. Abernathy with household tasks, partly out of a desire to earn her keep and partly to learn more about frontier housekeeping. In the afternoons, when Quinn returned for the midday meal, they would often read together in the library or take walks around the ranch property when weather permitted. On the third day, Quinn suggested a ride to show Katherine more of his land. The flood waters had receded enough to make most areas accessible, and he thought the fresh air would do them both good. Katherine readily agreed, eager to see more of the territory that might soon become her home. Mrs. Abernathy provided riding clothes that had belonged to Clara Jodhpurs, and a fitted jacket that, while slightly loose, served Katherine well enough. Quinn waited for her by the corral, holding the reins of 2 horses, his own Renegade and a gentle mare named Daisy. "She's steady as they come," Quinn assured Katherine as he helped her mount. "Perfect for navigating our uneven terrain." They rode first to the upper pastures where Quinn's prized breeding stock grazed. The horses were magnificent animals, powerful and sleek, their coats gleaming in the sunlight. "My father started with just 5 mares and a stallion," Quinn explained, pride evident in his voice. "Now we supply horses to ranches across 3 territories and as far east as Chicago." "It's impressive," Katherine said sincerely. "You've built something remarkable here." Quinn's expression softened. "It wasn't just me. My father laid the foundation, and I have good men working for me." They continued riding, cresting a hill that offered a breathtaking view of the valley below. The Yellowstone River wound like a silver ribbon through the landscape, framed by mountains still capped with snow despite the spring season. "It's beautiful," Katherine breathed, reining in her horse to better appreciate the vista. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Quinn confessed, stopping beside her. "When things get difficult or decisions need making, I come here to clear my head. I can see why." Katherine turned to find him watching her, his gaze intent in a way that made her heart quicken. "What?" she asked, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You look different out here," Quinn said softly, "more free somehow." The observation struck Katherine as profoundly true. In Boston, she had always felt constrained by expectations of society, of her parents, of herself. Here, against the vast backdrop of Montana, those constraints seemed to fall away. "I feel different," she admitted. "As though I'm becoming someone new," Quinn nodded in understanding. "The West has that effect. It strips away pretense." They dismounted to rest the horses, sitting side by side on a fallen log. Quinn produced a small canteen and offered it to Katherine, who drank gratefully. The spring sun was warmer than she had expected. "Tell me about your life in Boston," Quinn requested as he took the canteen back, his fingers brushing hers in the exchange. Katherine spoke of her childhood in the bustling city, of her education at her respectable girls' school, and of helping in her parents' millinery shop. "My mother was gifted with design," she explained. "She created hats that women from all over New England sought out. I inherited some of her skill, but none of her business acumen, I'm afraid." "And is that why you decided to join your aunt in Silverton? Because of the business failing?" Quinn asked perceptively. Katherine sighed. "Partly. After my parents died, influenza took them both within a week of each other. I tried to keep the shop running, but the rent was high and competition fierce. When the landlord doubled the lease terms, I had no choice but to sell what inventory remained and seek a new start." Quinn's hand covered hers, warm and comforting. "I'm sorry for your loss. Losing parents is never easy, no matter the circumstances." "Thank you," Katherine said, touched by his empathy. "What of your parents? You mentioned your mother returned east." A shadow crossed Quinn's face. "My mother never intended to stay in Montana. She was a Philadelphia society girl who fell in love with my father during his one and only trip east to secure investors for the ranch. He was handsome, charming, and full of stories about the frontier that captivated her imagination. But the reality didn't match her expectations." Katherine guessed. "Not even close," Quinn confirmed. "The isolation, the harsh winters, the lack of social engagement it wore on her. She stayed for us, for Clara and me, but after Father died, there was nothing keeping her here. Do you resent her for leaving?" The question was bold, perhaps too personal, but Katherine felt compelled to ask. Quinn considered this, his gaze on the distant mountains. "No," he finally said. "I understand her choice, even if I couldn't make it myself. This land gets into your blood, becomes part of who you are. But not everyone feels that connection. And do you think I will?" The words escaped before Katherine could consider their implication. Quinn looked at her then, his eyes searching. "I think you might," he said softly. "There's a strength in you that suits this place." The moment stretched between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to articulate. Finally, Quinn stood, offering his hand to help Katherine up. "We should head back. Mrs. Abernathy will have dinner waiting." The ride back to the ranch was quieter, both lost in their own thoughts. As they approached the main house, they saw a wagon in the yard, a familiar wagon with a newly crafted wheel. "Looks like Sela's finished your wheel," Quinn observed, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes," Katherine acknowledged, surprised by the twinge of disappointment she felt. "I suppose I'll be able to continue to Silverton tomorrow." Quinn nodded, dismounting and coming to help her down from her horse. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "If the road is passable," he said, "I'll ride out at first light to check." Dinner that evening was a more subdued affair than previous nights. Mrs. Abernathy, sensing the change in mood, kept the conversation light with talk of local gossip and plans for the spring planting. After the meal, Quinn excused himself to attend to some paperwork, leaving Katherine alone with her thoughts. She wandered to the library, drawn again to the piano. The melody she played was melancholy, reflecting her confused emotions. The prospect of reaching Silverton, of beginning the life she had journeyed so far to find, should have filled her with anticipation. Instead, she felt a growing reluctance to leave Blacket Ranch and its owner. "That's beautiful," Quinn said from the doorway, "but sad." Katherine's hands stilled. "I didn't hear you come in." "I finished my work earlier than expected." He crossed to stand beside the piano. "May I join you?" Katherine shifted on the bench, making room. Quinn sat beside her, his thigh warm against hers through the fabric of their clothing. "Play something happier," he requested. She obliged with a lively folk tune her father had taught her. Quinn watched her hands move across the keys, his expression contemplative. When she finished, he surprised her by placing his own hands on the keys. "Show me," he said. "Teach me something simple." Katherine positioned his fingers on the correct keys, guiding him through a basic scale. His hands were large and calloused from years of ranch work, but they moved with unexpected dexterity. When he made a mistake, they both laughed, the tension between them momentarily dispelled. "I'm a hopeless student," Quinn admitted after several failed attempts. "Not hopeless," Katherine corrected. "Just impatient." Their eyes met, and Katherine became acutely aware of their proximity. Quinn's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward. The first touch of his lips to hers was gentle, almost tentative. Katherine had been kissed before chaste pecks from eager suitors at Boston socials, but nothing like this. This kiss spoke of longing and possibility, of connection found in an unexpected place. Her hands left the piano keys to rest against Quinn's chest, feeling the strong beat of his heart beneath her palm. When they finally parted, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I found you by the river," he confessed, his voice husky. "I'm glad you did," Katherine whispered back, surprising herself with her boldness. Quinn cradled her face in his hands. "I don't want you to go to Silverton tomorrow," he said. "Stay at least a little longer." The request hung between them, weighted with implications. Katherine knew the proper response would be to gently refuse, to insist on continuing to her aunt as planned. But propriety seemed less important than the connection she felt with this man who had rescued her from more than just a broken wagon. "I'll stay," she agreed softly. "For a little while." Quinn's answering smile was radiant. He kissed her again, more confidently this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. Katherine allowed herself to be pulled against him, her own arms winding around his neck. The world beyond the library ceased to exist, narrowed to this moment and this man. A discreet cough from the doorway broke them apart. Mrs. Abernathy stood there, her expression a mixture of amusement and disapproval. "I've prepared hot chocolate if you're interested," she said, pointedly avoiding direct mention of what she had witnessed. "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Quinn replied, his voice remarkably steady despite the flush that had crept up his neck. "We'll be right there." When the housekeeper had gone, Katherine buried her face in her hands, mortified to have been caught in such a compromising position. "Oh God," she groaned. "What must she think of me?" Quinn gently pulled her hands away. "She thinks you've bewitched the confirmed bachelor of Blacket Ranch," he said with a smile. "And she's not wrong." The following morning, Quinn rode out as promised to check the road to Silverton. Katherine waited anxiously, her trunk packed but her heart conflicted. She had sent a message to her aunt via the telegraph, now functioning again, explaining the delay and assuring her of her safety. The response had been brief but relieved. "Glad you're safe. Blacket is good man, come when able." Quinn returned mid-morning, his expression serious as he entered the house. "The main road is still flooded in 2 places," he reported. "It's passable on horseback but not by wagon. It will be at least 3 more days before you can safely travel to Silverton." Katherine tried not to show her relief. "Then I'll have to impose on your hospitality a little longer." "It's no imposition," Quinn assured her, taking her hands in his. "In fact, I was hoping you might agree to stay even after the road clears." Katherine's pulse quickened. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Blackett?" "I'm suggesting that there's a position available here at the ranch," Quinn replied, his thumbs tracing circles on the backs of her hands. "The position of my wife, if you're interested," Katherine gasped. "Quinn, we barely know each other." "I know enough," he insisted. "I know you're brave enough to travel across the country alone to build a new life. I know you're kind to Mrs. Abernathy and patient with Hank's endless stories. I know you play the piano like an angel and laugh at my poor attempts at humor. I know I've never felt about any woman the way I feel about you." "This is madness," Katherine protested, though her heart raced at his words. "Perhaps," Quinn acknowledged. "But isn't that what the West is about, taking chances, seizing opportunities?" He drew her closer. "I'm not asking for an immediate answer, just promise you'll consider it." Katherine hesitated, overwhelmed by the speed at which events were unfolding, yet there was an undeniable rightness to it that she couldn't ignore. "I'll consider it," she finally agreed. Quinn's face lit up with hope. "That's all I ask." He sealed the moment with a kiss that left her breathless. The next 3 days were a courtship unlike any Katherine had experienced. Quinn showed her every aspect of ranch life, from the calving barn where new life entered the world to the breaking corrals where young horses learned to accept riders. He introduced her to the ranch hands, each of whom treated her with a respect that spoke volumes about their boss's regard for her. In the evenings, they would sit together in the library, sometimes reading aloud to each other, sometimes simply talking about their hopes and dreams. Quinn spoke of his plans to expand the ranch's operations, to experiment with new breeding techniques, and perhaps even establish a stage line between Silverton and the larger towns to the east. Katherine shared her own aspirations to one day resurrect her mother's millinery designs, perhaps opening a small shop in Silverton that would cater to the growing number of women seeking fashionable accessories, even in the frontier. "You could do that here," Quinn suggested. "There's a small building near the main house that was once my mother's conservatory. It could be converted to a workshop." The care with which he considered her dreams touched Katherine deeply. No man in her previous experience had ever viewed her ambitions as anything other than a temporary diversion before marriage and motherhood. On the third evening, Quinn arranged a special dinner. Mrs. Abernathy outdid herself with a roast beef, potatoes, and fresh baked rolls that rivaled any meal Katherine had enjoyed in Boston. The table was set with fine china and silver that Quinn explained had been his grandmother's. "She brought it all the way from Virginia," he said as they settled at the table. "My grandfather thought she was mad to transport such fragile items across the country, but she insisted some civilized touches were necessary, even in the wilderness." After dinner, Quinn led Katherine to the porch, where they sat in rocking chairs watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The spring air was cool but not uncomfortable, scented with pine and wildflowers that had begun to bloom in the meadows. "The road to Silverton will be clear tomorrow," Quinn said, breaking the comfortable silence. Katherine nodded, her heart constricting. "So I heard from Hank." Quinn reached across the space between their chairs, taking her hand in his. "Have you given any thought to my proposal?" Katherine had thought of little else for 3 days. She had weighed the practical considerations, the security of marriage to a prosperous rancher against the independence of working in her aunt's store. She had examined her feelings, the growing affection she felt for Quinn, the sense of belonging she had found at Blacket Ranch, and she had listened to her intuition, the quiet voice within that recognized a rare opportunity for happiness. "I have," she said, turning to meet his gaze directly. "And?" Quinn prompted, his expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Katherine took a deep breath. "It's still madness," she began, and saw his face fall. "But," she continued quickly, squeezing his hand, "I find I'm not opposed to a bit of madness. Yes, Quinn Blackett, I will marry you." The joy that transformed Quinn's features was answer enough to any doubts that lingered in Katherine's mind. He rose from his chair, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "You've made me the happiest man in Montana territory," he murmured against her hair. "I hope you'll still feel that way when you discover I can't cook to save my life," Katherine teased, her own happiness bubbling over. Quinn laughed. "Fortunately, Mrs. Abernathy has that well in hand." His expression grew more serious. "I want you to know that I don't expect you to give up your dreams. The workshop is yours whenever you're ready to begin." Katherine was deeply moved by his understanding. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing he would understand all she meant to convey. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silverton. Catherine's Aunt Eleanor proved to be everything Quinn had described: formidable but fair, with a sharp wit and a surprisingly sentimental streak that emerged when she saw her niece in the wedding dress Mrs. Abernathy had altered from one of Quinn's mother's gowns. "You look like your mother," Eleanor said, dabbing at her eyes. "She would be so proud of you." The ceremony was simple but meaningful. Most of the townspeople attended, curious to see the woman who had captured Quinn Blackett's heart after years of his steadfast bachelorhood. The ranch hands formed an honor guard of sorts, their usually rough appearance softened by freshly pressed shirts and awkwardly held hats. Quinn had never looked more handsome than he did standing at the altar, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face as she walked toward him on her aunt's arm. When they exchanged vows, his voice was steady and sure, a promise Katherine knew instinctively he would never break. The wedding celebration continued at Blacket Ranch, where tables had been set up in the yard and a local band played lively tunes for dancing. Quinn swept Katherine into a waltz, his natural grace making her feel like they were floating across the improvised dance floor. "Happy, Mrs. Blackett," he murmured in her ear as they twirled past smiling guests. "Deliriously," Katherine confirmed, still adjusting to her new name and status. "Though I'm not sure I'll ever get used to being called that." "You have a lifetime to practice," Quinn assured her, his arm tightening around her waist. The early days of their marriage were a period of adjustment for both of them. Katherine learned the rhythms of ranch life: the early mornings, the seasonal demands, the unexpected crises that required immediate attention. Quinn learned to share his space and his decisions with a partner whose perspective sometimes challenged his own. They had their first significant disagreement 3 months after the wedding, when Quinn proposed expanding into sheep ranching, a controversial move in cattle country. Katherine, concerned about potential conflicts with neighboring ranchers, urged caution and a more gradual approach. The argument that ensued was heated, with both presenting valid points but neither willing to concede. It ended with Quinn stalking out to the stables and Katherine retreating to their bedroom, each convinced of the righteousness of their position. Hours later, Quinn found Katherine sitting on the porch, watching the sunset with red-rimmed eyes. Without a word, he sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "I'm sorry," they both said simultaneously, then laughed, the tension between them dissolving. "You were right to question the timing," Quinn admitted. "I get carried away with new ideas sometimes." "And you were right about the potential benefits," Katherine acknowledged. "I let fear of change cloud my judgment." They reached a compromise, a small experimental flock to test the market and the impact on their relationships with neighboring ranchers. It was the first of many such negotiations that would mark their partnership, each one strengthening the foundation of their marriage. The following spring brought both challenges and joy. A late blizzard threatened the calving season, requiring round-the-clock vigilance from Quinn and his men. Katherine, now fully integrated into ranch operations, organized the women of the household to provide hot meals and dry clothing for the exhausted cowboys. When the storm finally passed, the losses were minimal, a testament to the ranch's preparedness and the dedication of its workers. Quinn, returning to the house after 3 days of almost continuous work, found Katherine waiting for him with a hot bath, a hearty meal, and news that left him momentarily speechless. "We're going to have a baby," she told him as he sat at the kitchen table, steam rising from his coffee cup. In autumn, according to Dr. Lewis. Quinn's fatigue vanished instantly. He rose from his chair so quickly it toppled backward, gathering Katherine into an embrace that lifted her off her feet. "A baby," he repeated in wonder, his hand moving to rest gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Quinn insisted on building a cradle himself, spending hours in the workshop perfecting every detail. Katherine, with Mrs. Abernathy's guidance, prepared a layette of tiny garments, her skill with needle and thread proving useful in ways she hadn't anticipated. Alina visited from Silverton regularly, bringing news from town and advice that Katherine accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The relationship between the two women had evolved since the wedding, with Alina gradually relinquishing her authoritarian tendencies in recognition of Katherine's new status. "You've done well for yourself," Alina observed during one visit, watching as Quinn and Katherine sat together on the porch swing, his arm draped protectively around his wife's expanding waistline. "Better than I expected when I invited you west. Did you have reservations about my coming?" Katherine asked, surprised by the admission. Alina considered this. "Not reservations, exactly, concerns. You were city-bred with refined sensibilities. I wasn't sure how you'd adapt to frontier life." "I wasn't sure either," Katherine confessed, "but I discovered I'm more resilient than I knew." "It helps that you have a good man," Alina noted, nodding toward Quinn, who was now kneeling to feel the baby kick. "Not all women are so fortunate in their husbands." Katherine followed her aunt's gaze, warmth filling her at the sight of Quinn's rapt expression as he conversed with their unborn child. "No," she agreed softly, "not all are." The baby arrived on a crisp October day, after a labor that left Katherine exhausted but triumphant. Quinn, who had paced the hallway outside their bedroom for hours, was finally admitted by a smiling midwife to meet his son. "He has your eyes," Katherine said as Quinn approached the bed where she lay cradling the swaddled infant. "And your determination," Quinn replied, noting the strong grip the baby had on his mother's finger. "He decided to arrive on his own schedule, regardless of what anyone else thought." They named him James Quinn Blackett after both their fathers. Young Jamie, as he was quickly nicknamed, proved to be a good-natured baby with a hearty appetite and a fascination with the world around him. Katherine found motherhood both more challenging and more rewarding than she had anticipated, while Quinn took to fatherhood with an enthusiasm that delighted everyone on the ranch. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, the Blacket ranch prospered. The experimental sheep flock had indeed proven controversial with some neighboring cattle ranchers, but Quinn's diplomatic handling of the situation, including offering grazing rights on some of his land during a drought year, had smoothed most ruffled feathers. Katherine, true to her ambition, had established a small millinery business in the converted conservatory. Beginning with designs for the women of Silverton, her reputation soon spread to neighboring towns. Ladies would travel considerable distances to commission a Katherine Blackett original hat for special occasions. Life settled into a pattern of seasonal work interspersed with moments of domestic tranquility. Summer evenings often found the family on the porch, Quinn playing simple tunes on a guitar while Katherine sang and Jamie danced with the uninhibited joy of childhood. Winter brought cozy nights by the fire, reading aloud from books Quinn continued to acquire for the library that was the heart of their home. When Jamie was 3, Katherine experienced a miscarriage that left them both grieving the child they would never know. Quinn, devastated by his inability to protect his wife from this pain, retreated briefly into work, before recognizing that his presence, not his absence, was what Katherine needed most. "I thought giving you space to heal was right," he confessed as they sat together late one night after Jamie had been tucked into bed. "But I was wrong. I should have been here." "You are here now," Katherine assured him, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's what matters." The shared sorrow ultimately deepened their connection, teaching them that vulnerability was not weakness but the truest form of strength. When Katherine discovered she was pregnant again the following year, their joy was tempered by cautious optimism rather than diminished by fear. Elizabeth Clara Blackett arrived safely in the spring of 1884, a small but robust daughter with her mother's copper hair and her father's determined chin. Jamie, now 5, approached his role as big brother with solemn responsibility, bringing his favorite toys for the baby's approval and insisting on helping with her care. "She's too little for horses yet," Katherine overheard him explaining to Elizabeth one afternoon as he showed her his wooden figurines. "But when you're bigger, Papa will teach you to ride just like he taught me." The scene encapsulated everything Katherine had come to cherish about her life at Blacket Ranch, family bonds strengthened by shared purpose. Traditions passed from one generation to the next, love expressed through both grand gestures and quiet moments of connection. As Blacket Ranch entered the 1890s, changes in the territory reflected broader shifts across America. Montana achieved statehood, bringing new regulations and opportunities. The railroad reached Silverton, reducing the isolation that had once defined frontier life and opening new markets for the ranch's horses and cattle. Quinn, ever forward-thinking, embraced these changes while maintaining the core values that had built his success. He installed telephones connecting the ranch to Silverton, invested in modern farming equipment, and sent Jamie to school in town rather than continuing with the tutoring that had sufficed for earlier generations. Katherine's millinery business evolved as well. With improved transportation making materials more readily available, she expanded her offerings to include dressmaking for special occasions. A trip to Chicago, her first journey east since arriving in Montana, introduced her to the latest fashions and techniques, which she adapted for her frontier clientele. Through it all, the foundation of their life remained the partnership they had formed that stormy night by the river. They disagreed at times, compromised often, and supported each other always. Their children grew in the shadow of this example, learning that love was not just an emotion but a daily choice to put another's needs alongside one's own. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Katherine with a journey to the spot where they had first met. The riverbank looked different now, more vegetation, a sturdier bridge crossing, but the essential character of the place remained unchanged. "I remember thinking you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen," Quinn reminisced as they stood looking out over the water. "Even soaking wet and furious about your broken wagon," Katherine laughed. "I remember thinking you were arrogant, assuming I'd accept help from a stranger. And now?" Quinn asked, drawing her into his arms. "Now I think you're still occasionally arrogant," Katherine teased, "but also the best man I've ever known and the only one I could imagine spending my life with." Quinn kissed her then, with the same tenderness and passion that had marked their first kiss in the library so many years ago. When they parted, he produced a small box from his pocket. "I had this made in Silverton," he explained as Katherine opened it to reveal a gold locket engraved with their initials and the date of their wedding. Inside were tiny portraits of Jamie and Elizabeth. "It's beautiful," Katherine whispered, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Not as beautiful as the life we've built together," Quinn replied, helping her fasten the locket around her neck. "When I told you we'd make it home that night, I had no idea how true those words would become." Katherine looked up at him, the man who had rescued her from more than just a broken wagon. He had offered her shelter from the storm, but more importantly, he had given her a home in every sense of the word, a place of belonging, of purpose, of love. "Home," she agreed, leaning into his embrace as the river flowed past, constant yet ever-changing like the life they shared. Together. As the sun set over the Montana landscape, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Katherine and Quinn Blackett stood by the river where their story had begun. Behind them lay years of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. Before them stretched a future they would continue to build together, day by day, choice by choice, love by love. The broken wagon wheel that had seemed such a disaster had in fact been the beginning of the greatest journey of Katherine's life, one that had brought her not just to a place, but to a person who had helped her discover the best version of herself. And in that discovery, she had found a home more permanent than any structure, more valuable than any possession. The river still flowed, the ranch still thrived, and the love that had begun with a chance encounter continued to grow, taking root in the fertile soil of the Montana Territory and blooming ever more beautifully with each passing season. For Katherine and Quinn Blackett, every day was a confirmation of the promise made beside a rising river so many years ago that together, they would always find their way home.